In Tech Matters, applying category management to mobile devices. Last October, the Obama administration banned agencies from opening new contracts for desktops and laptops. They named 3 government-wide acquisition contracts, or GWACs, as the main source for that kind of hardware. Now the Office of Management and Budget is considering taking that formula and applying it to mobile devices. Joining me with the latest is Jason Miller, executive editor at Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Jason, before we get to mobile devices, let's talk about laptops and desktops. Do we have any evidence that the ban on new contracts in that arena resulted in cost savings or other improvements?
You know, it's hard to say right now. It's only been a few months. I think what we're going to see is in 3 to 6 more months, we'll get a better idea of that contract. Let me tell you this, Morris, when I talk with federal chief information officers, and I do every week, what I hear from them is they are excited about it. They do see at least the potential of a contract or this set of contracts to really reduce the costs for their infrastructure. And in fact, many CIOs tell me they just want to get out of managing that infrastructure altogether. So I think that it's going to take a little time for that specific on laptops and desktops.
Now, you got your hands on a draft policy. It details how OMB wants to apply a similar formula to mobile devices. Tell us more.
Well, this is an interesting policy because, again, it's just in draft, so let's be clear, so it could change. But what the draft policy says as of now is agencies are going to be required to do several things. First of all, they're going to have to collect some data about the current set of mobile devices, mobile services, and we're talking about smartphones, tablets, anything that you or me maybe would buy for our families, that agencies buy for their employees, how much they're using it, and then what they're spending on it. And all that data is going to get put into a data collection tool, which then will be put on the acquisition gateway that GSA runs. Now, once that data is up there, agencies then will develop a transition plan, according to the draft policy, to move off of their current set of contracts and to the government-wide contract that GSA runs under the Strategic Sourcing Initiative, and then they'll be told to use that contract and only that contract. Now, there is, of course, the justification of says, well, if you can't use this contract, you must justify why. But for the most part, again, very similar to the laptop desktop one, they have to use that contract. And then finally, what's very interesting about this draft policy is it calls for a pilot program for small agencies who would kind of pool all the minutes together and then buy from that pool or pull from that pool, and GSA would run that pilot program. I think that's one of the most interesting things.
Now, this also is interesting. I think I know the answer, but why does this policy encourage agencies to purchase devices at least one generation behind the latest model? What's the logic there?
I think there's 2 reasons. The first is a cost factor. Obviously, if you're buying an iPhone 5 instead of an iPhone 6, it's cheaper. The second reason, I think, is a security issue to some extent. Obviously, cybersecurity is one of those topics we always have to talk about. But long story short is the last generation devices, they know more about them, know more about the operating system, understand maybe how to secure them better. So I think cost is a big factor, security is a secondary one.
Now, Jason, FITARA, the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act, gave CIOs purchasing power over technology in their agencies. CIOs considered that a big win. I'm curious, how do they view these blanket prohibitions? To the casual observer like me, they seem to be at odds with one another.
Well, what the government is trying to do, what OMB and the Office of Federal Procurement Policy is trying to do is really drive agencies to take advantage of the volume that the government has. When you're talking about millions of minutes, think about the discount they could get from Verizon or AT&T or any of the carriers, and there's nothing, really what FITARA is doing is building upon this idea of category management, this idea of volume buying, because it's telling the CIOs, hey, work with chief acquisition officers, work with chief financial officers, and come together to say, how can we buy as a enterprise? How can we buy as an organization instead of my office buys and your office buys and someone else's office buys and we're not coordinated? So I think it fits directly with FITARA.
So as you've talked about in the end, Jason, it's all about leveraging the federal government's substantial buying power. Initially, small contractors were concerned that this shift would leave them at a big disadvantage. Is that still the case?
It's hard to tell right now. I mean, the contracts that GSA is pushing for is really held by the big carriers, the AT&Ts, the Verizons, the CenturyLinks, but the small carriers can come in and offer services and do other things. So it's, I think, a bit early to tell right now what the impact will be. Now, when you talk about hardware and laptops and desktops, I think the small vendor has a big play in that because you still have a lot of these contractors who offer services and what they call value-added resellers who maybe will take a Dell laptop and put services on top of it. And I think that plays into those big government-wide acquisition contracts like NASA SOUP.
Jason Miller, executive editor at Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. See you next time, Jason.
Thank you.